alien emperor sent his obese daughter as a cruel joke, but fate had other plans. The twin sons of Vornith hung low over the red horizon, turning the desert scrapyard into a sea of molten light. Metal scraps glowed like buried embers, and the air shimmered with heat. Among the broken machines and rusted alien ships, a human mechanic named Hfy sci wiped grease from his hands. He had been fixing engines since he was a boy, traded between alien owners like a tool that refused to break. That morning, something unusual disturbed the quiet hum of the scrapyard. The sound of massive engines thundered across the sand, shaking the metal piles like thunder rolling through bones. Workers stopped, squinting into the light as a royal dropship descended, its hull marked with the golden crest of the Zerothian Empire. No one ever came here from the palace, not unless someone was in serious trouble. Hfy stood still, the wind lifting dust around his boots. When the dropship landed, alien soldiers marched out, their armor gleaming like obsidian glass. Behind them, an officer's voice rang out, cold and cruel. Human mechanic Hfy sci, by order of the Emperor, you are summoned to receive a royal gift. The crowd murmured, whispering in disbelief. A gift? For a human? That had never happened before. Hfy wiped his hands on his jumpsuit and stepped forward, his heart steady but uncertain. He had seen enough gifts from aliens to know most of them came wrapped in humiliation. As the ship's ramp opened, silence fell across the yard. From within the dark interior, heavy footsteps echoed slow, unsure, and strangely soft. Out stepped a figure draped in silken robes that shimmered faintly under the suns. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and unlike any Zerothian female Hfy had ever seen. The aliens around him began to snicker. Some covered their mouths to hide their laughter. Others didn't bother. "She's the Emperor's daughter," one soldier whispered cruelly. "Sent as a joke," another chuckled. A fine match for a human mechanic, both broken, both beneath notice. Hfy didn't laugh. He simply looked at her, really looked. Her scales were a deep shade of sapphire, catching the light in quiet patterns. Her eyes, large and silver, held something between fear and shame. She stood with her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly together as if bracing for rejection. The officer stepped forward, a smirk twisting his thin lips. "By command of His Majesty, Emperor Zareth, the Princess Thera of the Zerothian Dominion is gifted to you." Hfy blinked, his brow furrowing. "Gifted? To me?" he asked quietly. The officer sneered. "Yes, mechanic. Consider it a royal favor." Laughter rippled through the crowd like a cruel wave. The officer gestured to the princess. "She's all yours. Try not to break her, though it's doubtful anyone else would want her." Thera flinched, her face tightening with quiet pain, but she said nothing. Her chin trembled slightly as she glanced at Hfy, waiting for the disgust she expected to see. But Hfy didn't move. He didn't speak cruelly or mock her like the rest. He simply nodded once and said, "Come with me, princess." The officer snorted. "Princess? You'd call that one a princess? Pathetic human." Hfy ignored him, turning to walk toward the edge of the scrapyard. Thera followed, her steps heavy, her breath shallow and uneven, as they disappeared into the maze of rusted wrecks. The laughter of soldiers faded behind them. Hfy led her into a small workshop built from old ship panels and spare engines. Inside, it was quiet. Only the low hum of cooling fans and the scent of oil filled the air. He gestured to a bench. "Sit, if you'd like," he said softly. She hesitated, then sat, her eyes studying the human who hadn't laughed at her. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the faint whir of a power wrench. Finally, Thera whispered, her voice shaking through her translator chip, "You do not laugh." "Why?" Hfy looked up from the half-repaired engine and said, "I don't laugh at people who've already been hurt enough." Her silver eyes widened slightly. Her jaw trembling, she looked away quickly. murmuring something in her alien tongue. He didn't ask what it meant. Instead, he went back to work, pretending not to notice how she was watching him quietly. The workshop light flickered, washing her features in gold and shadow. She was nothing like the monsters the aliens said humans were lucky to serve. And maybe he thought she was nothing like the joke her father believed her to be, outside. The suns began to set. The desert wind blew softly against the metal walls, carrying the distant echoes of laughter and cruelty. Inside, two outcasts shared a silence that felt strangely alive. For Elias, it was the first time in years he had looked at someone and seen not an alien, but a soul just as tired. And for Thara, it was the first time anyone had looked at her without disgust or mockery. She touched the side of her arm nervously and whispered, "Thank you, human." Elias smiled faintly. "You can call me Elias," as night crept in. The old lights dimmed, leaving only the faint blue glow of her eyes. In that lonely workshop at the edge of the Empire, something fragile and dangerous. The human who was never supposed to matter, and the alien who was never supposed to be loved. Together, they took the first quiet breath of the story the galaxy would never forget. And before we continue, if you're enjoying this tale of humanity and compassion, make sure to subscribe to this channel Hfy sci so you never miss the next part. The next morning came with the roar of engines and the dry sting of desert wind. Elias woke early, like always, before the suns rose high enough to turn the sand white. His small workshop stood quiet, surrounded by wrecked ships that looked like sleeping giants buried in dust. But this morning was different, because in the corner sitting beside an old reactor core was the Emperor's daughter. Staring at the floor, she hadn't moved much since last night. Her posture was stiff, her hands folded in her lap, and her gaze unfocused. Elias wondered if she had slept at all. He poured water from a rusted canteen and placed it near her. "You should drink," he said gently. Her eyes flickered to him, uncertain, as if waiting for mockery that never came. When she didn't touch the canteen, Elias didn't push her. He turned instead to the half-dismantled crawler engine in the center of the workshop. It was a massive thing, rusted, dented, but powerful once upon a time. Now it sat silent, lifeless, like everything else the Empire had discarded. Thara's eyes followed him as he picked up a spanner, his movements calm and sure. The silence between them stretched long, but didn't feel empty. After a while, she spoke, her voice low and distorted through her translator chip. "Why do you live here? In this place of scraps?" Elias tightened a bolt, his eyes fixed on the machine. "Because broken things still have value," he said quietly. "They just need someone who sees it." Thara looked down again, her claws curling against her robes. She didn't understand why his words made her chest ache. As the suns climbed higher, heat shimmered through the air. Elias worked without pause, the sound of tools echoing through the room. At one point, the translator chip in Thara's neck sparked static, cutting her next words into fragments. She flinched, gasping softly as the small device blinked red. Elias turned quickly, reaching for his toolkit. "Hold still," he said, moving close. Her eyes widened as his human hands brushed the side of her neck. Careful, gentle. No one had ever touched her like that, without fear. Without disgust, he fixed the loose circuit. Soldering it with practiced precision, the device hummed softly. "Light turning steady green again," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "You fixed me," he smiled faintly, not looking up. "No, just your chip." But she didn't correct him. In her mind, those words meant more than he could imagine. No one had ever tried to fix her before, only hide her, mock her, or send her away. As the hours passed, Thara began to move around the workshop. Curious, she touched old machine parts, examined blueprints, watched Elias as he welded metal plates. Once, when a heavy wrench slipped and nearly hit him. She caught it mid-air with surprising speed. He looked at her, half impressed. Half surprised, she turned away quickly, pretending it was nothing. But for a brief moment, Elias saw something powerful behind those shy, silver eyes. Later that night, the wind howled through the metal cracks. Elias sat by a flickering light, tightening the last bolt on the crawler engine. Thera stood beside him, her tail twitching nervously, as if she wanted to say something. Finally, she asked, "Why didn't you laugh at me yesterday?" Elias set down his wrench and looked at her carefully. "Because I know how it feels," he said softly. "To be the one everyone points at." Her throat tightened, the words striking deeper than he realized. He went back to his work, adding quietly, "You're not what they say you are, Princess." For a long time, she didn't respond. Her voice came at last, small and trembling. "Then what am I, human?" Elias paused, wiping his hands. "You're someone who deserves better," he said. "Same as anyone. Outside?" Thunder rolled across the dunes, a rare desert storm gathering at the horizon. The wind grew stronger, rattling the workshop walls. Inside, Thera stood watching the lightning flash across the sky through the open hatch. Her reflection shimmered in the polished hull of the crawler. For the first time, she didn't see a joke. She saw someone who might be worth something after all. Behind her, Elias switched off the power tools. He glanced at her and said, "Tomorrow, we'll see if this thing still runs." Thera nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the distant lightning, but in her chest, something new was stirring, something dangerous and alive. Hope. The suns of Vornith burned white against a pale sky. Days had passed since the Emperor's daughter came to the scrapyard, and the desert wind no longer carried her silence. She had begun to move, to help, to exist beside Elias in a rhythm neither of them expected. The human mechanic rose early each day, working on old engines and salvaged ship parts. Thera followed quietly, watching how his hands moved steady, patient, careful. He never raised his voice, never ordered her. Instead, he spoke with a calm tone that made her want to listen. And every time he looked at her, it wasn't with pity, it was with curiosity. And something that felt almost like respect, but there was something else too. Something Elias kept hidden beneath the floor of his workshop. Each night, after Thera had gone to rest, he would open a metal hatch under the main bench. Down there lay a skeleton of steel and light a half-built starship. The Empire had forbidden humans from owning vessels capable of space travel, yet Elias was building one in secret. Piece by piece, from wreckage scavenged in the dark. He called it the Dawnbreaker, though no one else knew it existed. It was his dream, his rebellion, his quiet act of defiance. He planned to finish it one day and escape this world forever. But now, as Thera walked among his tools, he found himself hesitating, because the thought of leaving her behind began to feel wrong. One night, as he worked beneath the floor, he didn't hear her footsteps until she spoke. "What are you building?" Her voice asked softly through the metal grating. Elias froze, the light from his welding tool flickering across his tired face. He looked up and saw her standing there, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed. "You weren't supposed to see this." She tilted her head. Stepping closer, "It's a ship," she said quietly, her voice full of wonder and disbelief. "A real ship? You're trying to escape." He wiped sweat from his forehead, his tone cautious but honest. "Someday," he said. "If it ever works." Thera knelt beside the open hatch, her massive form filling the narrow space with shadow. Her tail flicked slowly as she studied the design. "It's old technology," she murmured. "Zarothian model, third cycle engine." "But you modified it." Elias looked at her in surprise. "You know machines?" A faint smile touched her lips. I may not look like it, human, but I studied mechanical engineering before my father decided I was an embarrassment. That night, for the first time, they worked together. She showed him alien designs he had never seen, teaching him how to stabilize the ship's reactor core, and he showed her human ingenuity ways to repair parts using almost nothing. They spoke little, but their silence felt like a shared secret. When she laughed softly at one of his mistakes, the sound startled even her. It was the first genuine laugh she'd given in years, and it stayed with Elias long after the workshop went dark. But beyond the walls of the scrapyard, danger stirred. A patrol ship passed overhead one evening, its shadow cutting through the desert haze. Elias looked up and saw the mark of the Imperial Guard. He turned off the workshop lights immediately. Tara's expression hardened. She knew what that symbol meant. "The Emperor's enforcers," she whispered. "They search for rebellion." Elias nodded grimly. "They can't find this ship. If they do, they'll destroy everything." That night, neither of them slept. Elias stood at the window, watching the desert sands shift under moonlight. Thara sat near the half-finished ship, her claws tracing the metal surface. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't thinking about shame or exile. She was thinking about freedom and about the strange, quiet human who made her believe it might be possible. As dawn approached, Elias finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "If we finish this ship, would you come with me?" Thara looked up slowly, the faint glow of sunrise painting her blue scales gold. Her breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. "I was born in a cage," she said softly. "I would die to leave it." The human smiled tired, hopeful, defiant, and in that moment, two souls, broken by the same empire, began to dream of something greater than survival. They began to dream of escape, but far above them. In the imperial palace of Vornith Prime, the Emperor himself had just received a transmission from his spies. His daughter was alive, living with a human mechanic in the wastelands, and his lips curved into a cold, cruel smile. He whispered, "Let's see how long their little fantasy lasts." The desert winds carried a heavy silence that morning. Vornith's twin suns rose over a sky the color of rust. Painting the scrapyard in a dull red glow, Elias stood by the crawler, tightening a valve while Thara inspected the ship's damaged wing plates. Their movements were calm, but beneath the surface, both felt the same quiet unease. The storm of destiny was closing in, and neither of them could stop it. A sharp sound cut through the air, a high-pitched frequency that made the tools on the table tremble. Thara froze, her silver eyes widening. She recognized that sound. It was a royal transmission. Before Elias could ask, a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room. A tall figure appeared, wrapped in golden robes and crowned with jagged silver horns. The Emperor of Zareth, her father, stood before them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Thara dropped to one knee instinctively. Her body trembling, Elias took a cautious step back. Wiping sweat from his palms, the Emperor's gaze swept over them both cold. Calculating, cruel. "My lost daughter," he said, his voice echoing like thunder. "I see you've made yourself comfortable in the dirt." Thara kept her head bowed, her voice shaking. "Father, Silence," he hissed, his words cutting sharper than any blade. "You disgrace our bloodline by consorting with a human slave." Elias clenched his fists, anger burning quietly in his chest. But Thara's trembling hand reached toward him, stopping him from speaking. She whispered under her breath, "Please, don't." The Emperor's burning eyes turned toward Elias. "So, you're the human who thinks he can touch what belongs to the Empire," he said coldly. Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "She doesn't belong to you." The room went deathly still. Thara gasped, horror flashing across her face. The Emperor's voice deepened, slow and venomous. "You dare speak to me, insect?" He raised one clawed hand and snapped his fingers. Outside, a warning siren blared through the scrapyard, followed by the distant roar of engines. Imperial dropships were approaching, closing in fast. Elias turned toward the door, his mind racing. How did they find us so quickly? Thara's voice broke. He must have been watching. Always watching. The hologram flickered again as the Emperor's image leaned closer. "I gave you life, daughter," he said, "and now I will take it back, along with your filthy human toy." Then the projection vanished, leaving behind only silence and dread. Thara collapsed against the workbench, her claws digging into the metal. "He'll destroy everything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You have to go." Elias shook his head. "Not without you." Her eyes widened in shock. "Elias, he will kill you." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "He already thinks I'm beneath him, Thara. What's one more reason to prove him wrong?" A deep rumble shook the ground. The first dropship was descending just beyond the ridge. Elias grabbed his toolkit and ran to the hidden hatch beneath the floor. "Help me open the Dawnbreaker," he said, urgency lacing his tone. Thara hesitated, torn between fear and something stronger. Finally, she slammed her claw against the release latch, the floor splitting open to reveal the unfinished ship. The glowing core pulsed weakly, flickering like a dying heart. "Can it fly?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "if we live long enough to start it." The first explosion hit the outer fence, shaking the entire structure. Sand and metal rained from above. Elias ran to the control console, while Thara pulled loose cables into place, her claws moving faster than any human hand. Flames reflected in her silver eyes as she shouted, "They're here!" Elias hit the ignition, sparks flew. Engines roared, but the ship stayed grounded. He slammed his fist on the console. "Come on, come on." Then, suddenly, a blinding blue surge filled the room. The ship's reactor stabilized, humming with life. Thara's hair lifted from the energy wave as she whispered, "It's alive." Elias turned toward her, breathing hard. "Then so are we," he said, grabbing her arm. "Get inside." Outside, the soldiers were closing in, blasters drawn. One of them shouted, "By order of the Emperor, surrender the princess." Thara looked back once toward the empire that had mocked her, chained her, and cast her aside. Her jaw tightened, and her voice turned cold. "Tell my father," she whispered. His joke just learned how to fight back. As the Dawnbreaker's engines roared to full power, the ground split beneath them. Dust and light swallowed the scrapyard as the ship lifted into the storm-filled sky. The Emperor watched from afar through his command screen, and for the first time in decades, his smile faltered. Because his daughter, the one he had sent away as a cruel joke, was no longer obeying anyone. The storm came before dawn, not of rain or thunder, but of fire. Metal and wrath across the burning sky. Imperial warships tore through the clouds, their engines screaming like monsters from another world. The once quiet scrapyard now shook with explosions that turned the sand into glass. Elias and Thara barely had minutes to prepare before chaos arrived. He ran through the workshop, throwing tools, crates, and data drives into the Dawnbreaker's open cargo bay. Thara followed, her breath sharp, her scales gleaming with sweat under the flashing red light. "They're too many," she said, her voice low but steady. "We can't fight them." Elias didn't look up, his voice a growl between clenched teeth. "Then we run." Outside, the Empire's soldiers landed, black armor gleaming, blasters glowing red. They moved like shadows, silent and deadly, spreading through the wreckage like a swarm. Thara's sharp hearing caught their steps before Elias did. She turned suddenly, grabbing his arm and pulling him aside. A blast struck the ground where he had been standing, throwing metal shards into the air. Elias hit the ground hard. Pain shooting through his leg, Thera roared a deep, primal sound that made the soldiers hesitate for a heartbeat. She turned toward them, her eyes glowing silver, her claws flexing. "Stay behind me," she said, but Elias, blood running down his leg, reached for his plasma torch instead. "Not a chance," he whispered. Together, they faced the first wave. The air filled with fire, light, and thunder. Thara moved like a force of nature, her massive frame slamming one soldier against a metal hull. Sending sparks flying, Elias ducked behind a shattered crawler, using the plasma torch as a weapon, its blue flame cutting through armor. For a few seconds, it almost looked like they could win. But more dropships descended. Filling the horizon with black smoke and red fire, they were surrounded. A sharp cry broke through the noise. Elias stumbled, struck in the shoulder by a blast. The torch clattered to the floor. Thera froze, her entire body trembling as she saw him fall. "Elias!" She screamed. Her voice echoed through the scrapyard. Louder than the explosions, she ran to him, catching him before he hit the ground. His hand was slick with blood, his breathing shallow. "Go," he whispered weakly. "You have to finish it, Fly the Dawnbreaker." She shook her head violently, tears welling in her bright eyes. "I won't leave you." Another explosion ripped through the far side of the yard. Flames roared toward them, debris raining from the sky. Something inside Thera snapped, something old, buried, and powerful. Her vision blurred as her heart pounded like a war drum. Her skin began to glow faintly beneath her scales. The air around her shimmered with energy, metal fragments vibrating as if drawn toward her. She laid Elias gently on the sand, her trembling hand resting over his wound. "Don't die," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not you too." Then the storm answered her. Every piece of machinery in the scrapyard came alive at once. Engines roared, cables whipped through the air, and piles of junk began to rise as if pulled by invisible strings. The soldiers stopped, their helmets turning in confusion. "What's happening?" One shouted. Thera rose slowly, her eyes blazing like twin suns, her body surrounded by a halo of light and dust. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice echoing with strange alien resonance. "But not him." She raised her arm and the machines obeyed. Metal claws from old loaders tore through enemy lines, grabbing soldiers and hurling them into the fire. Turrets turned on their own kind, blasting through armor with mechanical rage. The air itself seemed to twist under her power. Elias could barely lift his head, his vision blurring through pain. He saw her standing there, no longer the outcast, no longer the Emperor's joke, but a warrior princess awakened by fury and love. When the last dropship exploded in the sky, the scrapyard fell silent again. Only the crackle of burning metal and the hum of the Dawnbreaker's reactor filled the air. Thara stumbled back toward Elias, falling to her knees beside him. Her power flickered and faded, leaving her exhausted and trembling. "Elias," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "I didn't let them take you." He smiled weakly, blood on his lips. "Remind me?" "Never to make you angry." She laughed softly through tears, holding him close as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. Above them, the wreckage of the Empire's fleet burned against the pale sky. And for the first time, Vornith's desert world looked beautiful again. But deep in the shadows of space, the Emperor watched the flames through his ship's monitor. His claws tapped the armrest slowly. "So, my daughter remembers how to fight," he whispered. Then his expression darkened, his voice cold as the void. "Let's see if she can survive what comes next." The desert was gone, swallowed by smoke and rising fire. The scrapyard that once held their pain now burned behind them as the Dawnbreaker tore into the blood-red sky. Elias sat in the pilot's chair, his arm wrapped in torn cloth, his hands shaking but determined. Beside him, Thara guided the ship's controls with silent precision. Her glowing eyes locked on the storm of clouds ahead. The engines screamed against gravity as debris rained from the heavens. One wrong move, one slip, and they would fall back into the Emperor's grasp. Elias gritted his teeth, the wound in his shoulder throbbing. "Come on, Dawnbreaker," he muttered. "You weren't built to die." The panels flickered. Alarms screamed, and sparks burst from the control board. Thara slammed her hand on the override panel. Her claws sparking against metal, the ship jerked upward violently, cutting through the last barrier of atmosphere, and then silence. The noise vanished, replaced by the deep hum of space and the endless black beyond. They had escaped Vornith. But freedom, they both knew, would come with a price. Elias slumped back in his seat, gasping for air. Blood still seeped from his wound. Staining his torn uniform, Thara turned to him, her expression tight with fear and guilt. "Your body is too fragile," she whispered. "You're bleeding again." He tried to smile. "Humans are good at leaking. It's part of the charm." She frowned, pressing her hand gently to his shoulder. Her palm glowed faintly, the same strange light that had bent metal and destroyed armies. He flinched, but the pain slowly began to fade. When he looked down, the bleeding had stopped. The wound sealed like it had never been there. He blinked in disbelief. "How did you?" Thara looked away, her voice quiet. "My kind were built for war, Elias. Healing is a forgotten part of what we once were. Outside, the stars glittered like shards of glass scattered across eternity." Elias leaned forward, watching the burning world fade behind them. "That's it," he murmured. "The Empire's outpost won't see us for a while." Thara shook her head, her silver eyes darkening. "You don't understand," she said. "My father doesn't stop, he hunts." Her voice carried a weight of certainty. "He'll send ships, assassins, hunters." And worse, as if to prove her words true, a sharp tone echoed through the cockpit. The scanner lit up a red signal flashing in the far distance. Elias's eyes widened. "They're tracking us already." Thara's claws dug into the console, her heart racing. "He must have marked me. Something in my armor or bloodline." Elias turned to her, his gaze firm. "Then we find it and rip it out." They tore through the ship's dim corridors, searching for the source. Inside the storage bay, Thara ripped open her chest plate. A small crystal embedded near her collarbone pulsed faintly with red light. "It's a locator gem," she said bitterly. "A royal seal. I can't remove it without killing myself." Elias stepped closer, his hands trembling slightly. "What if we don't remove it?" he said slowly. "What if we overload it?" Thara's eyes widened. "That could destroy the ship," he smiled faintly. "Then let's not miss." They worked in silence, connecting the gem's energy pulse to the Dawnbreaker's auxiliary coil. The hum of the reactor deepened, building toward a storm. The red light from the gem grew brighter, hotter, until it filled the chamber like a living sun. Thara gritted her teeth, her claws gripping the floor. "Now, Elias!" He slammed the lever. A blinding surge of light exploded across the ship, sending ripples through space itself. The gem shattered with a scream of metal and energy. The scanner's red mark vanished instantly. Leaving only silence, Elias fell to his knees, gasping, his face lit by the fading sparks. Thara stared at him, half in awe, half in fear. "You would risk your life," she whispered. "For me?" He looked up at her, smiling faintly through the exhaustion. "I already did," he said softly. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the quiet hum of the Dawnbreaker filled the void, steady and alive. Then Thara stepped closer, her tall shadow falling over him, Her voice trembled with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. My father wanted to send me away to humiliate me, she said quietly. But he sent me to the only person who ever saw me. Elias met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. Then maybe this wasn't his punishment. It was his biggest mistake. Outside, space stretched endlessly before them. A new light flickered on the radar, a distant planet. Untouched, unknown, and full of promise. Elias looked at her and said, "Let's see where freedom takes us." Thera nodded, her eyes glimmering like twin stars. And as the Dawnbreaker disappeared into the dark between worlds, the Emperor's voice echoed faintly across the void. Cold and furious. "You can run, my daughter," he said. But the Empire never forgets. The Dawnbreaker drifted through the silence of deep space. Its hull carried scorch marks. Its engines hummed like a heartbeat in the dark. Elias and Thera had crossed 3 star systems in 2 days, chasing shadows and safety, but the stars offered no rest. Only the quiet whisper of destiny following close behind. Inside the ship, the light was dim, soft and golden from recycled power. Elias sat near the navigation console, his jacket torn, his face pale with exhaustion. Across from him, Thera stood by the viewport, her reflection shimmering in the endless black. She looked like a goddess carved from sorrow and starlight. Yet even in her strength, she looked lost. "He won't stop." "Will he?" Elias said quietly. Thera shook her head, her silver eyes never leaving the stars. "My father doesn't understand defeat," she whispered. "To him, losing face is worse than losing blood." Elias leaned back, rubbing his shoulder. "Then we'll make sure he loses both." She turned toward him with a faint smile. Surprised by his calm, humans, she thought, could smile even while their world burned. It was foolish and beautiful. A soft beep broke the silence. The communication array flickered to life on its own. Thera froze, her eyes narrowing. "It's a royal signal," she said, her voice low and tense. Elias moved beside her, hands ready to cut the feed. But before he could, a hologram burst into the air, the Emperor, tall and cruel, surrounded by the shadows of his throne. "My daughter," his voice thundered through the ship, and her pet mechanic. Thera's claws tightened against the console. But she stayed still. Elias stepped in front of her, defiant even in the face of the galaxy's most powerful being. The Emperor's smirk widened. "You think you've escaped? I know where you are," he said. "You carry my blood, and through it, my reach." Thera's voice was cold now, her tone like steel under pressure. "Then cut your hand off, father, because I no longer belong to you." The Emperor's eyes flashed with rage. "You are property of the throne, a failed experiment, a disgrace that will be erased from every archive." Elias's jaw tightened, his voice rising. "You sent her as a joke," he said. "But you gave her what every ruler fears most, a reason to fight." The Emperor laughed, the sound echoing like thunder through static. "A human defying me. How poetic," he sneered. "Do you think compassion wins wars? Do you think love will protect you from me?" Elias stepped closer to the hologram, his voice quiet but steady. "I don't need to win a war," he said. "I just need to show her she's worth one." Thera's breath caught, her eyes softening. For a moment, even the Emperor's smirk faltered. Then the transmission cracked with static as Elias hit the power relay. The hologram shattered into sparks, leaving the ship silent once more. Thera turned to him slowly, her voice trembled. "You defied an emperor for me." Elias smiled faintly. "No," he said. "I defied him because he forgot what power really is." He pointed to her heart. "It's here, outside." The Dawnbreaker drifted toward a pale blue world at the edge of the unknown systems. It wasn't marked on any chart untouched. Wild and full of air they could breathe. As they descended through its thin clouds, light filled the cabin, Green valleys spread beneath them. Rivers gleaming like silver veins. Elias laughed softly. Looks like freedom finally has a view. Farah smiled for the first time without sadness. Her tail brushed lightly against his arm. A silent thank you only she could give. When the ship landed, silence followed, a new silence. Not from fear, but from peace. They stepped out together, the wind warm, the sky painted with two distant suns. Farah knelt, pressing her hand into the soft soil. Her eyes wide. No chains, no orders, she whispered. Only life. Elias stood beside her, his voice gentle. And maybe a chance to start again. Far away, back in his golden palace, the Emperor watched the last trace of their ship fade from his sensors. He sat alone in his throne room, surrounded by silence thicker than stone. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar defeat. His laughter faded, replaced by a whisper even he didn't understand. Perhaps she was never the joke. And across the stars, on a forgotten world, a human and an alien princess built a home from the ashes of their pain. They worked side by side under twin suns, two souls once broken by cruelty, now bound by something stronger than empire or blood, hope.